All right, thank you, Lisa. Can everybody hear me okay? Mic's working? Cool, thanks. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Glad to be here with, oh, sorry. All right, you're going to have to forgive me because I'm a Mac user. How do I do, go into a presentation mode?
Just try F5.
Oh. There we go. Yep, cool. Thanks, Stephen. So I'm here with Stephen today, my partner in crime, I guess, to talk about NFV testing. We have a couple of organizations. One's called ETSI. It's a standard body that started a lot of the work on NFV. And OPNFV, this is an open source project that got started about 3 years ago. Just quick show of hands, like who's already familiar with OPNFV? Like who's heard of it? Fair number of you. So I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail. I won't necessarily bore you. So both organizations have been involved in NFV testing for a number of years, and we've had a number of events over the past couple of years. We'll talk about some of the work that we've done and some of the collaboration that we're looking forward to do. So OPNFV, like I said, is an open source project. It launched in September of 2014. And what's different about OPNFV compared to a lot of different open source projects is that our focus is more on integration and testing. Like projects like Open Daylight or OpenStack, I mean, they're more focused on like typical traditional software development. Our focus is more on integrating different components. OpenStack obviously is a key component, like Open Daylight for SCN controller, ONOS, OpenContrail. We heavily use things like Ceph, DPDK, and KVM. Like all these components are integrated in our project, and we do a testing to make sure that it meets a lot of the telco requirements. For those of you that are not, I mean, people familiar with NFV in general, like so I don't need to go through that. So this is a genesis of our project, and we have like people like Tetsuya here, who's been involved in founding of our project. What a lot of especially the service providers noticed was that, I mean, there are a lot of components that are out there in open source environment, like a lot of the projects I mentioned, but there was no open source project focused on integration. So that's our goal, and to do a rigorous testing to make sure that we meet the telco requirements or service provider requirements in general. And as part of these integration and testing, after our first release, RNL, we started this discussion in late 2015 about we need a formalized like event or activity where community members and others can come together to do a lot of these interoperability testing, and that's how the Plugfest got started. So I'll just jump to that really quickly, and I'm going to quickly skip through this since a lot of you guys are already familiar with OPNFV. So what is a Plugfest? So we wanted a venue or event where people can get together for about a week and work on a lot of the interoperability issues or questions or challenges. Things like, OPNFV, our releases, we put all these components together, integrate them, do some of our testing. But how does that actually work on different hardware configurations? Try to do this deployment and testing on a variety of different hardware, and even try to mix and match some of the components. For example, what happens? We obviously, I mean, one of the earliest SCN controller that we used was Open Daylight. Rather than using a vanilla Open Daylight, what happens if you plug in a commercial product that's based on Open Daylight, as an example? Like, how does that work? And obviously, the big thing nowadays, or it's been discussed for a long time, is VNF onboarding. Like, how do you, or what happens when you deploy a VNF application on top of a platform like OPNFV? So this is sort of what we wanted to accomplish when we kicked off the Plugfest discussion in a couple of years ago. And a couple of things I wanted to point out. This is a public event. This is open to anybody. You don't need to be a member of OPNFV project. It's free of charge. So starting with our first Plugfest we had last year, we have participation consistently from a lot of non-members and also from service providers. I mean, the one we just had in Paris couple of months ago, we actually had a service provider, Deutsche Telekom, that participated for a few days, and they're not even a member. They just heard about the event from a lot of their friends at Orange and other carriers, and that was really nice to see. The only requirement, there's no cost and fee in terms of participating and no membership requirement. The only thing we require is that when you register, you just click the box saying, I accept the rules of engagement for the Plugfest. And the rules of engagement is pretty simple. I assume this presentation will be loaded somewhere. That's a live link to the document. Basically, the rules of engagement it's a roughly page and a half. It's not too legalistic. It basically talks about two things. Like one is that just because you participated in the Plugfest doesn't mean that you can go out and say our product is certified or approved by OPNFV. I mean, that's not the intention of the activity. So that's one item. The other is we want this event to be a place where people can come and experiment and see how things work. So obviously when you try that, things don't necessarily always go well as planned. I mean, sometimes you find bugs and things fail, and we want this to be a safe environment. So we didn't want potential mudslinging going on, saying vendor A comes in and says, I deployed OPNFV scenario, and we ran through all the test cases without any problem, compared to vendor B. So comparative marketing is what we wanted to avoid. We want the focus of this event to be a technical interaction amongst participants. So those are mainly the two requirements that we spell out in the rules of engagement. So that's the only requirement for participating. And also, the other thing about the Plugfest, what we wanted to do was that we wanted to hold an event after each of our major releases. And similar to OpenStack, our release is a couple of times a year. We have a 6-month cadence. So the first one we had was after our second release, Brahmaputra. It was hosted by Tetsuya's organization, Cable Labs in Colorado. And then, I mean, I'll go through some of the highlights of what we accomplished at various Plugfests. And we moved on to University of New Hampshire. And then, like I said, our last Plugfest was hosted by Orange just outside of Paris. And a couple of things I want to mention about, especially the first two Plugfests, both Cable Labs and UNH. I mean, they've held like similar testing activities and certification activities for several years. So their experience was very, very much appreciated, and they were instrumental in making sure that the planning and the execution of the events were very successful. I mean, if you go to either the Cable Labs or UNH campus, you go there, you walk in, and it's just amazing. You just can tell. You can just tell that they're just set up to do this because it's very open. It's easy to collaborate with people. Lab setup is, there's no drama. There's no drama about the power, networking, or any of these requirements. So it was, so to kick it off in those two organizations was, I think, was key to our success. And our next Plugfest after our Euphrates release, our release is about to come out in late September, early October, will be hosted actually by Intel at their Jones Farm campus outside of Portland in Oregon. So we're looking forward to that. And in case you're wondering, our release names are based on river names. And then we like to go to different geographic continents. So we started with Arno in Europe, Brahmaputra in Asia, Colorado, Danube, Euphrates, and so forth. The other thing I want to mention about our Plugfest, starting with our event in University of New Hampshire, we typically had a separate Hackfest event, like about 4 times a year. This is where developers get together to hack and also work on their next release activities. And it just made a lot of sense to join forces. Because what happens is that you're doing some deployment or test, you run into issues. The PTL for release engineering is just across the hallway. So it's easy to just tap on his or her shoulders to get help or even file bugs if needed. So it's worked out pretty well, and that's sort of our plan going forward. A few things on how these events are planned. So, typical open source fashion, this is all done in the open. So we have bi-weekly planning calls for upcoming Plugfest events, and this is open to anybody. We have call logistics information listed on the wiki. So if you're interested, we'll probably start the planning call for the Plugfest in December, probably shortly after Labor Day. So if you want to just listen into the conversation that's going on as we're planning our next event, feel free to dial in. And most of the activities actually happen on the wiki in terms of who we want to recruit for our next event, what kind of testing we want to do, some of the test cases, what kind of hardware and software resources we're going to have available. So that's done mostly on the wiki and also on the planning calls. And also the communications during the event. I think we started, Tessia, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the first event we had about 50 people participating, and it grew to about like a 90 was our last one. So the communications can be challenging when people are doing a lot of work, and then it's hard to keep track of what all activities are happening, so the communication is pretty important. We do mainly two things. One is that when we kick off the event on Monday, after some opening, welcome speeches from a couple of people, what we do is I literally go around the room in an auditorium like this with a microphone and ask some key people from each member companies or different projects that they're representing to talk about what they want to accomplish during the week. I'll just stick my microphone to Stephen and say, Stephen, what did you bring this week, and what do you want to accomplish? And we try to take copious notes of that on the wiki. And then we revisit that list when we have our daily huddle at the end of the day. So we want to talk about, I know Stephen wanted to do a multi-site deployment. We want to hear about the progress he's made on like Monday evening, any issues that he ran into, any learnings, and also especially we want to hear about bugs. Like if you found bugs on like Funk Test or any of our projects, that's what the plug test is for. We want to surface that and learn from those bugs. And typically, by the time we do our daily huddles, like somebody's already opened up a Jira ticket so that somebody can work on and work on those bugs. So that over the past 3 years, I think we made some tweaks here and there, but I think it worked out pretty well. So that's how we. During the week, keep our communications going, and all those learnings are documented in the learnings page on the wiki. So that's sort of the logistics during the week. And last but not least, OPNFV, we publish official results through a white paper, and we do it within like the 60 days. I think, after the event in New Hampshire, it probably took close to 60 days because of the holidays, but the last one I think was actually published within like the 4 to 5 weeks, so we're trying to shorten that time, and that sort of serves as our official report. So I just want to go through, highlight some of our accomplishments from our first 3 Plugfests. For our first Plugfest, this was definitely a learning experience. Although it was, we had a lot of help from people like Tetsuya and Lincoln at UNH who's done this before. This is the first time that OPNFV was getting together as a community, and I don't think I'm exaggerating. When we first started, when I showed up on Monday, I had no idea how this was going to go, and was a little bit nervous. But I think it only took a couple of hours for people to get going and jump straight into work. So this is one of the things I learned as sort of a operations manager for the technical community. I didn't appreciate the fact that a lot of the PTLs or project team members were basically outside of their immediate realm of responsibilities. They weren't quite sure what's happening with other projects. So I think that became pretty obvious after day one. For example, somebody who's on an installer, working on an installer project, for them, like a lot of the testing activities after something's installed was like a black box. So I think that people came to a lot of appreciation in terms of like learning more about other projects. So like doing an initial deployment and testing, it sounds kind of trivial, but it was like a really good exercise for a lot of the attendees. And at that point, this is a little over a year ago. It took close to 4 hours to deploy OPNFV and complete all the testing cycles. It just took a real long time. And then we've made a lot of progress since then. I think now the window's gotten down to more like it's 2 hours versus 4. But going through those exercises, although it was like a time-consuming and a little painful, but it was a good learning exercise for a lot of people. A couple of other things we did was, I think Open Daylight was only deployed on one of the installers, but the Open Daylight team worked with a number of different installer project teams and PTLs to get that available on other installers as well. So that was a good accomplishment. And a couple of groups of people, including Stephen, actually deployed VNF applications on OPNFV Brahmaputra, which at the end of the day, that's what you want to see, right? So that was pretty cool. And then you can see we've been able to capture group photo shots of each of our Plugfests, and you'll see that if you see the photos, the group of people are getting getting larger and larger. And a lot of our events in OPNFV, we try to hit different geographic areas, and then that's one of the side benefits. You definitely get a local flavor each time you do events in different locations. And I had to add a picture of the beer here. This was one of the happy hours that was hosted by Cable Labs, and all of those, I think there are like 15 bottles. Those are all like local Colorado beer, and you don't see Coors Light there, which I thought was awesome. And then also this is a hardware that was brought actually by Intel. It was a nicely packaged, all they need to do, they shipped it like this, and all they need to do was basically plug in the cables, right? And I think this is one of Stephen's colleague from China swapping out one of the hardware. I think they were doing like encryption or security testing, right? So nice, real nice setup. In Colorado Plugfest that we had in December last year, you can see that it's like a real nice setup in terms of a lab environment. And at the bottom, this is either our kickoff meeting or daily huddle. This is where I'm going around the room with the microphone to people have people share their goals or learnings. So this is the first event where we had the OCP-based hardware show up to OPNFV community. So both Lenovo and Nokia brought their OCP-based hardware. So sort of first opportunity to marry open source software and open source hardware, which we thought was cool, and it was very heavily used. So the picture's a little grainy, but like the two big boxes on either side of the picture here, like one next to these two gentlemen and one by the window. These are OCP hardware, and they were very heavily used and was popular places. I think you may have even done some testing on Lenovo hardware, right? So that was really cool. And then Nokia definitely brought their OCP hardware again to Paris. So the work is ongoing in terms of verifying OPNFV platform on OCP hardware. The second key thing that we did was integrating OpenO. OpenO is now part of ONAP, but the first integration of Nano component with OPNFV. We had an army of people from OpenO, both from China Mobile and Huawei, participate, and they were able to accomplish that within a week, and even do a nice demo at the end of the week. So that was really nice to see. And the final item is what Stephen and Wind River team worked on, basically multi-region deployment. I think, Stephen, correct me if I'm wrong, you had Titanium server running in your lab in Santa Clara, somewhere nearby, and then you had OPNFV Colorado deployed on one of the servers at University of New Hampshire.
We have them we do a couple of different things, but we have them, and I'll talk about that a little bit in the lab section. Coming up.
Okay, so, and then, the basic key point is that you had, two OpenStack instances running on different regions, but sharing key OpenStack resources, right? So I think it's like a very, definitely interesting exercise or experiment that Wind River team did. So that was our second Plugfest last year. And, oops, sorry, I guess I moved forward too quick. Our last Plugfest in Paris, as you can tell, the group shot's gotten more impressive. This is the first time I think Orange, hosted an event for developers, and this was like a public event. They've obviously done a lot of testings internally with vendors and invitation basis only, but this is like a first public event they held, and I thought they did a phenomenal job. Even the layout of the facility, as you can tell from the photo, is like pretty open, like easy to collaborate with people. Some of the things we did, I mean, I can't believe this is just only like a few months ago. It seems longer than that for some reason. But so, you know, Wind River team actually basically continued the multi-site testing, and this time around even brought along their friends from Advantech, who had edge server that was hosted in the lab at Orange. One of the vendors brought basically full network stack, including Nano and VNFs, and did their testing there, testing at our Plugfest. And we also had a couple of testing vendors, like both Spirent and Ixia were there, and so we were able to do more realistic testing with their tools, as our testing community is trying to move towards doing also stress testing versus just like a performance and functional testing that they've been doing over the past couple of years. I guess one other thing I want to point out, like a lot of our community members, like Huawei, Intel, Lenovo, Nokia, they've obviously brought their hardware to wherever the Plugfest activities are, but a lot of other companies also made their hardware resources available remotely. So I think the mix for our Plugfest in Paris, we had about like 3 vendors had hardware on site, but the rest of them, like 4 or 5 of them actually had their hardware available remotely in their labs, like in Germany. Intel had their pods available in Oregon. So we had a lot of hardware resources available both on site and remotely. I'm not 100% sure what the mix will be for our next Plugfest, but I mean, obviously having those hardware resources is pretty crucial. And speaking of local flavors, we got absolutely spoiled with wonderful cheese during the week. It's hard coming back to the U.S. and eat American cheese. But I'm going to wrap this up pretty quickly. I don't want to run out of time before Stephen gets up here. So our next Plugfest, like I said, is on December 4th through 8th at Intel in Hillsboro, Oregon. And we'll start our bi-weekly calls pretty soon, shortly after Labor Day, like I mentioned. And then we'll have an announcement on our mailing list. And also, I did spin up a basic wiki page, but it's pretty bare minimum because we haven't started our planning activities yet. But the logistics for the planning call will be there as well. And I believe the event page and registration site should be up in about a week or two. So stay tuned for that. The other exciting news, this got confirmed this Tuesday. Tetsuya was on the call with Etsy. As you'll hear from Stephen's presentation, I mean, basically both OPNFV and Etsy are trying to solve the same problem, right? And then, you know, does it make sense to have our own event that's separate from Etsy? So we've been talking to Etsy about trying to co-locate at least one of the events per year. And we finally found a date that works for both organizations in June. We'll be back in France at Sophia Antipolis at the Etsy facilities. So I think Etsy Plugfest that Stephen's going to talk about in more detail, it's 2 weeks long. So I guess the first week will be Etsy Plugfest, and the following week and first week of June will be a combined event. So we're extremely excited. So you'll probably see more announcements on that in the next few months. And then we want to keep collaborating with other communities. You know, we obviously be working very closely with OpenStack and Open Daylight, but other communities that we're starting to talk to, like ONAP. And also continue working with OCP as well. So, Stephen, I think I may have eaten into your time.